One of the most important financial decisions you'll ever take is getting a mortgage. It's one of the biggest financial commitments most people make, alongside private school fees for their children if they're lucky enough to be able to afford them. So, what is a mortgage? That's what we'll cover in this video. And what do some of the key bits of jargon plastered all over the newspapers actually mean? Right, a mortgage is a secured loan. That makes it different from a loan that you might take out, for example, unsecured to buy a car, or just simply by racking up credit card debt or using a store card. Those are unsecured. All right, now the difference is very simple. A secured loan, a mortgage, here's the deal. You go to a bank, say I want to borrow £100,000 for argument's sake. The bank says, that's fine, Tim, but we want the loan secured on an asset, that asset being the house you plan to buy. The deal is simple, and it's a two-sided deal. In return for that security, the bank will offer you a low interest rate, much lower than on, say, a car loan or a credit card or a store card loan. Right? You can pick up mortgage rates for around 4%, 4-5% at the moment, depending on the period you go for, whereas unsecured store card loans could cost you up to 30. All right? So that's the upside. The interest rate is low, but that's because the loan is secured, and that means if you fail to repay it or keep up with repayments, the bank reserves the right to seize your property and sell it and use the proceeds to repay the loan. Right? So a mortgage has one benefit up front. The interest rate tends to be a lot lower than you can get on other loans, and that's because the bank has a lot of security in the form of your property. All right, now property prices can go down as well as up, all right, which is why banks don't always lend, or certainly not anymore, the full value of the property to somebody who wants a mortgage. Okay? The heady days, the ridiculous days before the financial crisis are now long gone. So that brings me on to my first piece of jargon related to mortgages, loan to value, LTV. Now if you see that, what does that mean? And what practical consequences does it have for you trying to get a mortgage? Well, here's how it works. People who've seen my videos before will know that graphics are a particular forte of mine. So there's a house, all right, and let's say that the value of the house on the open market is £100,000. All right, and you plan to put down a £30,000 deposit. Lucky you. And that means you need a £70,000 loan or mortgage. All right. Now, how do I know you've put down a £30,000 deposit? Well, maybe you can't afford a £30,000 deposit. The deposit is down to what you can manage to scrimp and save together, okay, persuade parents or friends to give you, whatever it happens to be. So you've got a deposit from somewhere, all right, and the rest is the mortgage. So a combination of what's called equity, that's your bit, and a loan from the bank secured on the property makes up the funding for the £100,000 property. All right. Now, here, the LTV, as you'll sometimes see it quoted in the press, a bit of jargon there, the loan to value ratio is simply that compared to that as a percentage. All right, so here, the LTV, 70,000, as a proportion of the value of the property, literally the loan to value ratio is 70%. All right, and in simple terms, basically the higher that is, the harder it is to get the loan. All right. Now, back in the ridiculous days, pre-financial crisis, there were banks around that would say, no problem, you could have LTVs of more than 100%, 125%. You could actually borrow more than the value of the property from a bank. And they'd even give you hints and tips as to what to do with the extra. All right, so on a £100,000 property, this might sound a little mad, but it was happening, you could borrow £125,000. And I'm not kidding, there were banks' websites saying things like, well, book yourself a holiday, buy a car with the extra. Now that is madness and got a lot of people into big trouble, which is why LTVs tend to be a lot lower now, okay? Because of something called negative equity, which is the third bit of jargon I'll cover just now. But here's my takeaway, Okay, the higher the loan to value ratio, naturally, the higher the interest rate and the harder the mortgage will be to come across. So if you can scrimp together as much of a deposit as you can get hold of, bring down the loan to value ratio, you'll tend to find that better deals then become available. Why are we no longer seeing loans in excess of 100% the value of the property? Well, unfortunately, if you allow someone to borrow a huge amount of money and the value of the property then drops. So imagine, for example, if I take out the deposit altogether, all right, and I make the loan 100%, all right, so imagine that the whole thing, still following my scribblings here, is funded by a mortgage. The danger is this: if the value of the property then drops, which it could do, to 90,000, you are now in something called negative equity. It's the danger of taking out loans that are a high proportion of the value of the property. Negative equity means the property is not enough to pay back the loan. 90,000, if you sold the property tomorrow, won't pay back a loan of £100,000. That's a problem. Okay, it can leave you unable to move, for example. So that's a trap that quite a few people, unfortunately, knowingly or otherwise, probably unknowingly, fell into as property prices started to come off, okay, once we hit the financial crisis in 2007. And that's why, unfortunately, banks are now being very, very conservative. Unfortunately, because it makes it harder for a lot of people to get onto the property ladder at all. Okay, so that's a negative equity, what the Americans call being underwater. Okay. Now, once you've decided how much you're going to borrow, 70,000 in my previous example, you've got a couple of choices. You can either go interest only, or you can go repayment style mortgage. Okay, what does that mean? Basic choice. All mortgage products, all loans fall into one of those two camps essentially, no matter how they're written up in the advertising literature. They're either interest only or repayment. That's worth bearing in mind. Interest only is tempting. With interest only, you borrow, let's say, £100,000 and you commit to just pay the bank the interest on the loan, okay, at whatever rate that happens to be, 4% for argument's sake. So the £100,000 you're not paying back, all right? Now, how's that work? You've got to pay it back at some point. The idea is you just write a check, if you like, you pay the bank the interest every month on the loan, and then you set up another vehicle that will eventually pay off the capital, because you've got to still pay off the £100,000 as well as the interest, all right? And that could be some sort of equity-based product, all right? They used to be known as endowment mortgages. Now, upside to interest-only loans, the payment every month to the bank is lower than it would be if you were paying them back interest and some of the original capital of £100,000, okay? That's the upside. The downside is you're going to be pretty damn sure that whatever you're going to use to repay the capital after 20 or 25 years, for argument's sake, is enough to do the job. And the problem a lot of people found, or have found in the past, is they set up these kind of little investment funds on the side, saying, well, after 20 years, this will have grown FTSE 100 fund to £100,000 or more, so I'll be able to clear my mortgage and have a party. All right? Problem is, if the equity market plummets, your little savings vehicle isn't enough to repay the original loan, then you've got a problem. Okay? So, interest-only mortgages, attractive because the initial payment to the bank will be relatively low, but you've got to have some way to pay off the capital that you've borrowed in the future. The alternative is a repayment mortgage. As the name suggests, there, every month, your repayment to the bank is interest on the loan, 4% for argument's sake, plus a little bit of the original capital you borrowed. So the idea being that after 25 years, for example, you will have cleared all of the £100,000, if that's the amount you borrowed, that you owe the bank, okay? Now, downside to that one is you will find your monthly payments to the bank are a little bit higher because they include interest and some capital. Of course, the upside is, you know, provided you keep your job and keep up the repayments, you will clear your mortgage after 20 or 25 years. All right, no doubt about it, because you are chipping away at the capital every month, okay? Now, that means that normally I would recommend, if you can afford it, you do a repayment mortgage of some sort. But watch out, okay? There are a couple of traps. which I want to finish this video on, this is a beginner's introductory guide, there are a few traps to watch out for with mortgages. So, decision tree so far is, how much do I want to borrow? How much do I need to borrow? How much of a deposit have I got versus the amount required to buy the property I'm after? Okay, that will affect the deal you can get from a bank. But then you need to decide on the amount you're borrowing. Am I going to go down the interest only or the repayment style route? Okay, and I've already highlighted a couple of criteria to think about in making that decision. Now, let's say for a moment I've picked a repayment style mortgage. There are one or two other things to look out for. Number one, when you're looking up mortgage rates, again, you can look up on sites like Moneyfacts and Money Supermarket and so on. You can look up these rates on a number of different sites. When you're looking up mortgage rates, just watch out, because you might see a juicy low rate. You go, aha, brilliant. You know, for argument's sake, 3%. And you think, well, that's a really low interest rate. I'm having some of that. Watch out. Number one, is there an arrangement fee on top? Some lenders will charge you quite a meaty arrangement fee. We could be talking, you know, £1,000, £1,400, £2,000 just to set up the mortgage. All right, all of a sudden that 3% is not looking quite so good. So you need to compare apples with pears. You know, is 3% with an arrangement fee the same as 5% with no arrangement fee, for argument's sake? All right, so there's one little trap to watch out for. Always check the arrangement fee. Number two, watch out for lowball initial deals. The ones where the bank says, come to us, borrow from us, because what we can do is set you up for a few years on a really low rate. But then watch out, because once that low rate period ends, you might be kicked into what's called the standard variable rate, SVR, and that may be, first of all, not a fixed rate, and secondly, a lot higher. All right. Thirdly, redemption penalties. If you take out a deal and it commits you to a minimum number of repayments over a number of years, watch out that you're not stung, okay, if you need to sort of switch product or kick out of there early, okay. You know, in other words, if something goes wrong, you may be stung for a big redemption penalty simply to get out of the mortgage earlier or move it or change it, okay. So there's a few traps to watch out for when you're shopping around for a mortgage. All right, so just to recap there, a mortgage is a secured loan. The good news is that means you can borrow lower than you would on other types of loan, okay? First decision to make, how much do I need to borrow? The less you need to borrow, the better the deal you'll get, okay? Third thing, just to bear in mind, is that you've got to make a decision between interest only and repayment, okay? And you've also got to make a decision between paying a fixed rate and paying a variable rate of interest. Lots of things to think about here. Fixed rates, certainty. Variable rates, well, the opportunity maybe for your mortgage payments to go down if interest rates fall as well as up if they rise. Okay, so yeah, another decision to make there. And do watch out for the little stings in the tail, including arrangement fees, low initial rates to grab you in, and redemption penalties. To download this free video to your favourite mobile device, find us on iTunes by searching for Money Week. And the entire video archive is also available free. Just visit moneyweek.com.